Right, I'm gonna start the show. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the late start. We are still, in fact, missing one guest. We think there's gremlins in the works somewhere. And for some reason, my screen was green completely. I don't know why that was. Well, I turned into the Incredible Hulk. But this is our World War II swing music show. And I have two guests for you so far, and hopefully a third joining us. So from the USA, Kurt is joining us from the incredible Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And I think I have gone green again. I don't know what that is, folks. I have no idea. So, Kurt, thanks for joining us. It's 11 o'clock in LA. Is that right?
Yes, sir. It is. Rainy day in Ventura.
And joining us from London is Ray Gelato from the numerous bands, the Ray Gelato band. And I can hold up a Big Bad Voodoo Daddy CD, and I can hold up various Ray Gelato CDs, but I can't hold up anything Jive Aces because all my music is streamed, and as is my rest of my Big Bad Voodoo Daddy stuff. So that's the best I can do in plugging you guys. But Thank you. I am all green for some reason. I have no idea why I'm green.
You're not green now. It's gone.
Okay, I'm not green again now. Okay, I don't know what's going on there. Right, so folks, we are going to be talking about swing music in World War II. And thank you guys for joining me, because you are taking swing around the world. Well, you're not this year, but you have been taking swing around the world and all types of vintage music. And I want to get, your feedback on the importance of that genre, because I maintain it was one of the things that helped win the war for us. And I'm just going to start with a quote from Jimmy Doolittle, who was the commanding officer of the United States 8th Air Force in England in World War II, and he famously led the Tokyo raid. And he said about Glenn Miller's music, he said, I'll just read the quote there. He said, "Next to a letter from home, Captain Miller, your organization is the greatest morale builder in the European theater of operations." So that was the commanding officer of the 8th Air Force referencing that Glenn Miller and his band were the greatest morale boost to the world, in addition to letters. So, Kurt, Ray, you grew up in an era with these records. You both grew up with these records. What is it about swing music that brings people together? I'll start with you first, Kurt. You're the drummer, but you've co-founded your band. What is it about swing music that unites?
Well, I think there's a lot of things. Number one, just the word itself and swing evokes a feeling. It just feels good. When something's swinging, it feels good. And so it makes you feel good. But also, I think the interesting thing about this music is that it really appeals to all the generations. It'd be a hard sell to get my parents to come see Kendrick Lamar or something like that, even though I love that kind of music. And, some of the music that my younger son listens to that's super, super heavy, that really doesn't, it doesn't really go over into the next generation, but swing music does. I can't tell you how many festivals we played where there'll be like 3 generations, kids, their parents, and their parents' parents, all sitting on a blanket watching, or all up against the stage or dancing or just having a blast. It's the great unifier, I think.
Absolutely. Ray, I guess you're gonna echo that sentiment.
Well, there's not a lot I can add, because I completely agree with Kurt, what he said, that it's a unifier, but it's a happy music, but it's not a happy, dumb music. It's not a novelty music. There's a lot going on. There's the image, the clothes, all those cats used to wear such beautiful stuff, and we try to do the same, all of us. And it's the solos going on. These bands had amazing soloists. So there's something for everybody. There's something for the layman, and there's something for a musician as well in this sort of music. But it's just a fantastic music, and it makes people feel happy.
Well, that's the thing. The point of tonight's show is to talk about it in World War II. And what was so important about swing music is it was part of the actual war effort. It was militarized. That thing, I've done a bit of research, and thank you to my old friend Ashley Elliott, formerly from London, now lives in Sweden, who supplied me the paper he wrote for his degree on swing music in World War II. So thanks, Ashley, for all that information. But the bands before the war, there were the black bands, there were the white bands, there were the European bands, but World War II brought them all together, because that was the message. We were sending a message to Hitler that swing music unites. Swing music brings together everybody together from different backgrounds. And I was reading about, and I want to have, because Kurt, your grandfather was involved in the war, and I want to bring you into that. But during the war, the V records, 4 million V records were produced, and they were kind of like the old floppy vinyl records I got in the 80s from the Melody Maker. And they were produced by the government, sent around the world. They sent out 150,000 portable record players. And the thing is, the GIs themselves, the servicemen, influenced what music was being created, because when they sent these records out, they came with questionnaires. And they said, what do you want to hear? And they would say, we want to hear Artie Shaw do this. We want to hear Count Basie. We want to hear Cab Calloway do this. And they came back with their feedback, which is like social media today. That's like the audience telling the bands what they wanted, which was something that wasn't happening before the war, wasn't happening after the war. You didn't have much contact with your, I mean, Ray, we're talking before you went online. You know, you do your live streams to your fans now. You couldn't have done that 20 years ago.
No, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it before the pandemic.
Yeah. So, you know, it's that bringing together of swing music, I think, is very important. So, Kurt, tell us about your family connection, because, you know, you had a relative who was in a U.S. Army band. What do you know about that? What can you share with us?
Yeah, that was my grandpa. He got drafted just 2 weeks shy of his 38th birthday. And he spent 1944 and a little bit of 1945. And he was stationed in Persia. And so they would travel up and down, and they would entertain the troops that were on R&R. And I don't know, for me, I think that was an amazing job that he had, because he was helping them kind of decompress from what they were doing there, and also supplying a little bit of nostalgia, you know, about home. Because that's, I'm sure that when they heard that music, that they thought about home. And so pretty great job. You know, he actually said that if he didn't have a family, because he had my father, who was about 8 at the time, that he would have maybe preferred that job. It was pretty great, you know. But, you know, just missing home and having a family, it didn't really work out for him. But that was his job, was to entertain the troops that were on R&R. And so it's not probably a lot different than what we do, you know, going out there and playing for people. And I can't tell you how many times that we've played shows and people come up and said, you know, your music makes me so happy, and it makes me have a good day. And, you know, our job is to go out there and bring a smile on people's faces. And that's definitely what my grandpa did. So, you know, when you've been out, you've both been touring for years, and apparently I am still green. I don't know why I'm still green, but I am still green. When you've been touring, you know, you said there you've had 3 generations watching you. You must have you ever met band members who, other than your family members? You know, when you in your early days, you must have guys who gigged in the war, who played in these bands. Ray, yeah. Did you encounter those guys?
Well, what I have, yeah, I've encountered a few of them, and as Kurt said, we get generations coming. You know, when we play the residency at Ronnie Scott's, we'll get 3 generations of family. We'll get the old guy with the World War II medals and that sort of thing, and that's hang on, you've gone. No,
I've just switched myself off again to see if I go green.
Yeah. So say that again. Sorry, I just lost my train a minute ago. Sorry,
encountering people who'd served in bands, who actually played in bands in the war.
Well, I'll tell you one story I had many years ago when I was in a band called the Chevalier Brothers. That we kind of I don't say we started it, but we sort of helped kick off that swing revival in the early 80s. You know, when people like Joe Jackson were doing it. Well, we were doing it before him. And I think he saw us play at Dingwalls and got influenced to do that Jumpin' Jive album. We were doing it before. And we saw, it's the truth. We got to know him, and but I met somebody. I met Vito Musso's grandson. Do you know Vito Musso, the saxophone player that played with Benny Goodman? He was the soloist with Benny Goodman's band, Italian-American guy. And the grandson come up to me and said to me, I mean, I wasn't as accomplished on the saxophone as I am now, but I could play. And he said, you remind me of my granddad, Vito Musso. So, wow. And he was in Goodman's band, but yeah, I've met some of those guys. I've met many of those players who played back then, like people like the saxophone player Illinois Jacquette, who was Lionel Hampton's main soloist. I've met Arnett Cobb and spoken to, who was another guy with Lionel Hampton, and people like that. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough. Harry Sweets Edison, because I'm a big jazz fan as well as it's swing. To me, it's under one umbrella. I was fortunate enough to go see some of those swing players back in the 80s, and they were still playing, and they were still playing well. So I got to talk to quite a lot of them. They didn't tell me about their experience in World War II, but they were there, man. They were in those bands. Illinois Jacquette's solo on Flying Home was the famous solo that all the troops apparently could whistle. I mean, the layman could whistle that solo. So that's my kind of take on it, you know.
I mean, yeah, and my thing is, there were those great World War II songs, the Vera Lynn type thing, but they're very much, because you said it, like, they're very much about what they'd been missing, the past, I suppose. Yeah. But to me, swing music represents the future. It's what they were fighting for. They were fighting to take the girls to dance, to have a Coca-Cola, to go and have a few drinks. And swing music is the escape. It's the dream. And interestingly, you know, it represents everything that the Nazis are trying to stop. You know, bizarrely, and we will do another show about the swing music obsession by the German middle classes in the 1930s. But during the war, you know, Goebbels is making speeches about the terrible music that's coming out of America, and so the Allies capitalized on that and they used it. And there was a psychological warfare unit as part of SHAEF that actually broadcast 8 hours a day from 1944 to 45 to Germany, saying things like, they were interviewing Glenn Miller, and it was all with presenters in German, and they were saying things like, you know, this is a music that brings people together. You have people in your bands from Russia, people from Spain, people from Italy, people from Britain, and this was sending a message to Germans that and those that were under occupied, the occupation of the Germans, that this was a music that was everything that the Nazi Empire was fighting against. So, you know, swing music is, in that regard, is very important. But Kurt, as an American, you know, you've traveled around the world, you've played in these bands all over the world. Is the reaction to swing music different, perhaps in Europe, than it is in Japan or in America? You said it brings people together, but is there a marked difference from country to country?
You know, one thing I noticed in Australia was that they like every kind of music. Like when we played the Byron Bay Festival, the stage, there was 10,000 people there to see every band, regardless of how big or small or their genre, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I mean, it seems to me like it was pretty universal, the acclaim that music was causing, no matter where we went. I remember the first time that we played in England, and it was phenomenal. It was so much fun. But you know, pretty much everywhere we played, even in Istanbul and Japan, there's universal love for that kind of music. And I don't know if it's just how exciting it is to see a bunch of live instruments playing, you know, and the horns are so powerful, and then just the feeling of the music and how people enjoy it. But I wouldn't say that it was a lot different in Europe than it was in the United States. You know, it's always been really good. And in the early days, when there weren't a lot of bands playing this kind of music, there'd be what we call the jaw drop, you know, where you'd come out and we'd be in suits and people would kind of look at us like, what are we in for? And then we'd start playing and their jaws would just go down because it was so powerful and so exciting. And yeah, that's my take on it.
Well, that must have been the same experience for the people watching these bands in the war. You know, you're a GI, you're a Tommy, and you're in London in perhaps 1943, and then a band comes out there, and they were big bands back then, weren't they? You know, some of them were 30, 40-piece bands. I mean, the brass sections were enormous. The sound must have filled that up, and then you got the dancing and the exotic nature of it. I've always wondered what it was like if you're an airman based in England and you've got that night out at a dance, and the next night you're jumping into a B-17, you're flying into Europe, and you're doing that contrast of the best night of your life followed by one of the potential worst days or the end of your life there. But Ray, you're kind of the musical scholar here. Do you think the bands in World War II changed their music in any way to kind of fight for the war effort? Was there a sound change? Was there something musically they did?
Well, it's a long one. We'd need longer than this show to speak about it. But because the economy started to get bad, so the big bands started to reduce, and then you started to get combos like Louis Jordan, you know. And so Louis Jordan's every much as bit of swing as a big band. It's just done in a different way. And yes, he did war effort songs. You know, he did things like the GI Jive. It's the GI Jive, man alive. And it's all about the trials and tribulations of being a GI. I mean, the last line is get on your bunk, drop all your junk, clunk. You know, it's these GIs must have really related to this. You know, so yeah, I think in somebody like his instance, they would have changed their sound, but they had war songs. Duke Ellington had the slip of a lip might sink a ship for the Spies, you know. And so yes, absolutely, they adapted their music to the GIs without a shadow of a doubt.
I mean, Glenn Miller famously combined the First World War Sousa marches with the swing sound. I mean, American Patrol is the kind of the archetypal song that represents those two genres. So he's kind of giving the military that military kind of marching, traditional kind of brass band thing, but he's adding that the swing modernity to it. So Glenn Miller was clearly kind of pushing the envelope musically, which is why he got the kind of the government contract with Eisenhower, and Eisenhower, you know, had the orchestra go to England and was there. It was actually a part of the war effort. We also must mention Artie Shaw, who was doing the same thing for the US Navy. Less well known in the war than Glenn Miller was, but he was doing exactly the same thing. And they gigged it was like 600 gigs a year. They were doing 3 a day because they would play a small one at one base, hop on a ship, move somewhere else, play a second one at midday, and a third one. So they racked up an extraordinary number of gigs over like a year. Artie Shaw. So that was some incredible stuff there. But Ray, again, you know, as you know, the rhythm, the drums. What do you hear in those wartime produced songs that perhaps weren't in the songs from the late 1930s? They obviously tried to kind of capitalize on the sound there. What do you hear when you hear those classics?
Well, the sound changed, you know, the sound changed. I think maybe I might be wrong in this, but maybe it got a little more energetic for the jitterbuggers, you know. I just think I hear a slight evolution in the sound, you know, a little bit of an evolution. In fact, the sound got looser in the 40s. In the 30s, it was more sort of dum, 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 a little more hysterical and a little, I love it, but a little more, not rigid, because it still swung, but in a different way. I think it got a little bit looser, those bands. I mean, Glenn Miller's band, the band was tight as anything, but the rhythm is, as Kurt said at the beginning, it got more that kind of loose swing that makes you feel good. You know, it's not so frantic as the 1930s. So I think it evolved naturally, or maybe it evolved because of the war. I don't really know, you know.
And Kurt, what do you feel about that? Do you hear something in the rhythms of the wartime songs?
Yeah, I do. I mean, personally, I think that they did change them, like he was just saying, to make them more danceable, right? So maybe a little less like Powerhouse and something you'd hear on TV movie shorts. You know, it's frantic and really meant to support something that you're seeing on the screen, and maybe more fitting for a dance floor. You know, I know that personally, when we first started, we didn't have a huge songbook of original songs, so we raided, you know, the vaults and tried to play as many songs as we could that would get people on the dance floor and having a good time, so that they would remember, wow, that was really, really fun. I want to do that again. And then we got that residency at the Derby. And so we'd play 3 45-minute sets. So we had to find a lot of songs, and then also write songs that were just perfect for getting people on the dance floor, you know, just right in that perfect beat per minute, you know, that would get people jumping. And so I do think that music did change like that to kind of, for the audience's sake, you know, as opposed to bebop, which was just, you know, an exploration and evolution of the music.
Well, that's the interesting thing I was going to bring it up later on, but it came up now, is the very coming together of all these people in the war actually is what, in a weird way, facilitated the breakup again after the war, because everyone went back to their communities. The black bands went back to their places, and the people went back to the Midwest and started the Western swing, and then jazz and bebop and started. So weirdly, the very coming together of the war actually split music after war. Then you get all the kind of rockabilly genre, which I'm a bit of a rockabilly guy in my part-time, and that thing. So bizarrely, the very thing that brought everybody together kind of split it after war. So it took then your revival that you were all part of, and you know, in the 80s and 90s. And Joe Jackson, I remember buying that album.
Me too.
You know, and I was buying stuff like Echo and the Bunnymen and the Damned at the same time, and I was buying the kind of the swing stuff, and my brain was like a sponge for all these different genres. But you know, going back to the point about swing music in World War II, you know, it was a winning factor. It was something that brought people together, and I think that hitting that thing about it being danceable was a key thing, because when you play a gig, you guys, there's not much chance that half your audience might be killed within the next week. I mean, that's unlikely. These guys are playing a gig, when Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw and these guys, they're playing a gig on a Pacific island where those men are going to go into combat the next day, possibly. So you want to give those people the very best experience they can possibly have, because it might be the very last experience they have. Can you, I mean, you've obviously had some great gigs. Can you kind of relate to the kind of pressure these guys must have been under, the performers, to give that entertainment? I mean, we all have stage fright, but Ray, can you imagine what it was like going out to playing to US Marines or British Commandos?
I think if any of us were around back then, we would have gladly done it, you know, to help the effort and to play. But I how can I put it? I can't put myself in their shoes because I wasn't there, and I can't imagine what it'd be like to play to an audience of young men, you know, that many of them would not come home again. You'd never see, you know, and be killed. So I think that would be an unbelievable thing. But I think human beings are adaptable, so the band would get up probably and just give their all, and that's it. Just try to do their best. But I think unless you were there, it's very hard to put yourself in the shoes of those people. You know what they were doing. I mean, they were doing an incredible job.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Kurt. I mean, what did you speak to your grandfather? Did he give any kind of sense of that, or anybody he knew that of the pressures of playing to guys who might die?
Well, unfortunately, when I started Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, my grandpa had already passed away. But I would visit. They lived in Michigan, St. Joe, which is not far from Chicago. So whenever we would go on tour, our manager would help schedule in a day so that we could go. We would take the bus there to St. Joe, Michigan, and take my grandma out to dinner. And she would tell us a lot of stories about that. And, you know, I do think that there's a lot to be said for what you were saying, you know, because his job was to entertain troops that were on R&R and then that were going to go back into battle. There's a big stack of letters that my father is holding for me that he wrote when he was away at the time. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get a hold of them yet because I think he's kind of holding on to those for me as a inheritance. But I can tell you from my experience, just being on the road, you know, for 2 months and missing home, I do think about a few of the letters that I was able to see where my grandpa talked about being away from my grandma and my dad for over a year, not seeing them. And then I say to myself, all right, well, yeah, sure, I'm homesick and I do feel anxious about playing this next gig, but let's put this into perspective. You know, I'm going to wake up tomorrow in a hotel bed, have a nice hot shower. I'm not going to be waking up in, you know, Remagen or something like that, or have to, you know, go out and actually risk my life for my country. So that kind of thing really did help put this all in perspective for me. And then also just have a lot of gratitude for a job, which really is, you know, just to cut right down to it, is just to make people happy. You know, that's what we do.
Yeah. I've changed my camera setting first. I think I'm bigger now, but I think I should be less green now. So that's, you're gonna larger me, but I'm less green. But you know, the thing about this, we said about the power of that music and the importance of that music. As I said, you know, Eisenhower specifically wanted the Glenn Miller Orchestra in England because he believed it was an essential part of the war effort there. And you know, Jimmy Doolittle referencing that there, it was something. I mean, there was even studies done about the morale of the German people, and the German people were kind of interviewed, and they said, yeah, we hated hearing this music coming because it was everything we hadn't got, everything that we were being repressed by, because the Nazi regime was limiting them and killing people, and they could hear this freedom of expression coming from America and from Britain, because we mustn't forget there were British swing bands in World War II. The RAF Squadronaires were very huge, very important, and toured all the bases. So, you know, the thing about the bringing together of the cultures, I think, is important, because then I'm going to ask you a music question. As you know, you say, Kurt and Ray, you know, you've both played cover songs, you've also written your own material, but do you think without the war years, we wouldn't have had that, I'm going to call it cross-pollination? Because it was that the black musicians playing with the white musicians. I know that some of the bands were segregated. There was the official army problem of segregation, but the bands still played together. They shared the music, the recording sessions. So without that coming together, would music not have kind of combined in that way? What do you think about that, Ray? Do you think it was important for the pushing forward of music?
Well, I do. I mean, you know, there was obviously terrible racism going on and segregation with the black troops, you know, being segregated. I mean, my dad was in the Air Force my dad's American, you know, I don't know if you knew that. He's from New Jersey. He lives over here, but he wasn't in the war, he's in the 50s. He was conscripted, and that's where he met my mum. I'm sidetracking, but it's an important point. But he told me that there was a whole, there was segregation in the 50s where the black troops would have to stay in a different barracks, which is, awful. But I do think that music transcends that. I think it does now. I hope it does now. And I think it did back then, because people like Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman would hire. But this was before the war, you see. Benny Goodman was hiring black musicians, and so was Artie Shaw. And so was Gene Krupa, with people like Roy Eldridge, and Artie Shaw hired Billie Holiday to sing, didn't he? So I think yes, I think probably in the war people just thought, to hell with all this, we're all in this, and we've got to mix in a bit more, That's what I think anyway. But we've got to remember also, before World War II, there were certain white band leaders who were hiring black musicians, and hats off to them for doing that.
And Kurt, what have you got? What's your feeling on that?
I don't think that the mixing of cultures stopped when big band went away, because then of course you had R&B and rock and roll and bebop, and that was kind of embracing all of that. I mean, just bebop alone with Art Blakey and his rating of Afro-Cuban rhythms, and Elvin Jones. I mean, so. Yeah, I think it was definitely, the influence definitely was there, and it was taking the music on a new evolution, with rock and roll and R&B and so forth. So that's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, again, I was saying earlier about this, the fact that these VVET records were sent out with questionnaires. The GIs, the servicemen, were very, very knowledgeable about who they were listening to. They knew that it was a so-and-so solo by so-and, or it was so-and-so on sax, it was so-and-so in the department. And they would request more of certain people, because what was happening, they were churning out so many tunes. The recording studios were like a production line. They were shoving in the string, shoving in the horns, shoving in this, and turning out hours and hours of music. But the people listening to it were responding, saying, we want more of that guy there who's playing. And of course, if you're just seeing a name on a disc, you don't know whether that guy's white or black or in my case green tonight. So what was happening is, black musicians were being requested, but no one knew they were black. They were just picking up by the sound they were hearing. Yeah. So that's why I was making that comparison to social media, because the audience was affecting what music they were recording the next batch. So the band leader was thinking, hang on, we've got lots of requests for this guy, and this guy may have been white, this guy may have been Italian, he may have been black, they picked that guy again because that's what the audience was doing. So it was the first kind of era where the audience, as I said earlier, were pushing what they wanted to hear. And that's got to be kind of unique back then, because, when you think of Frank Sinatra, I'm a big Frank Sinatra fan, by the way. I don't think he made one music the fans wanted. I think he always made the music he wanted to sing. I don't know. I mean, I'm misjudging Frank Sinatra then, but during the war, there was definitely this idea that the GIs themselves were getting the music they wanted. And I think that's very important. In terms of the reaction again, so you've both said you've had 3 generations of people listening to you. The swing music. Do you think it's also a nostalgia, not just for the music, but it's the nostalgia for the togetherness? Is it something about, we look back at the war years, for all the death, we look back on the fact that we did look after each other. We were single-mindedly trying to win the war against the Axis. So Ray, I'll bring you in first. Do you think swing music still has this ability to unite?
Yeah, I do. I mean, maybe not as much as back then, in a way, because it was the music of the day. And just to backtrack on what you said, those soloists you were talking about, that the people would have known the names of, like Tex Beneke with Miller and Charlie Ventura and Roy Eldridge, all these people, Black and White, they were the pop stars of the day. They were the pop. That was the music. They were the Ariana Grandes or whoever of their day, male and female. So they would have been known. But I think the music still has definitely a power to unite, without a shadow of a doubt. I think all music does. But I think certainly swing does, or swing-based music, because it's very, very accessible. I mean, I'm a big jazz fan. I know Kurt was mentioning bebop, but I love all jazz, all sorts of jazz. But I think swing has more power to unite than say modern jazz, because it's an accessible music. It's not better than modern jazz. It's just more accessible, and people like that. as I said earlier, it's musical. It's got the image. People like the clothes. Even now, when we all wear the nice suits on the stage and that, people love that because it's something different. You know, obviously in the 40s that was the norm for them to do that. You know.
Mm. No, I mean, definitely. I mean, in my case, I find some jazz, it's a bit Marmite with me. You know, you kind of love it or hate it. I find some of it very accessible and some of it's kind of pushes me away a bit. But swing doesn't. I mean, I haven't been to a gig for ages because of COVID. When I go to a proper 40s night or a swing band, if I see someone not tapping their foot, I just think they must be completely weird. I mean, how could you be there and just be sitting there with your arms folded? If you don't tap your feet and snap your fingers to swing music, there's something actually wrong with you. I think, you can dislike certain genres, but if you can't get your feet tapping to a swing band, I mean, Kurt, I'll bring you in again. I mean, have you ever had kind of converts, people who you thought they kind of went to a gig kind of reluctantly, dragged along by some of this, and well, that was a great night out? Is that something that swinging does, do you think?
Absolutely. After every show that we do, previous to COVID, we would do a meet and greet after the show. So we'd play our show, we'd go kind of dry off for about 10 minutes and then go out front and sit at a table, and there'd be a line of people that would come through that wanted to meet us, and we'd sign whatever they wanted. And you definitely would either see the youngsters who normally would be a little petulant for being dragged out, that were just, their eyes were wide to see Dirk or some of the horn players and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe the noise that came out of you. Or there would be maybe their grandmother who didn't want to go out and just said, oh my God, you remind me of my husband, who served in the war or was in a band like that, or we used to go out and dance every Saturday to this kind of music, and oh, I'm just so happy to see you. So that kind of, if I can draw the line back to the unifying element, is definitely there, and I think that's one of the best things about this kind of music.
And the legacy of swing music is that if you're browsing YouTube, you've only got to hear In the Mood or an Andrew Sisters number, right, or Count Basie, and you see accompanying images of P-51 Mustangs or a battleship going out. They're completely together. The music and the imagery is completely tied together. Whereas perhaps with punk music in the 70s, I do think of 1970s Britain when I think of punk music, where punk music doesn't necessarily come out that root and with that imagery. And swing music to me has that complete, as you say, Ray. It's the suits, it's the style, it's the way you guys move as one. It's the choreography of a band when they're performing there. All the horns going up, the saxophone moving. And I can only bring it back to what we said earlier. I mean, if I was an airman or a British serviceman or whatever, and I had a chance to go to a swing concert in 1943 in London or in Bedford or overseas somewhere, to have that sense of escapism would have been absolutely extraordinary. And as I can see why Doolittle said that what Glenn Miller and these guys were doing was as important as a letter back home. It absolutely reminded you what you were fighting for, what the war was about, what you were representing, and better days. So yeah, it looks like I don't think Ian from Ian and the Jive Aces is going to join us. Unfortunately, I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to do a second show with him later on. I'm sure he's got lots to talk about. But Ray,
hey,
we'll bring it back.
If I can interject just for a second.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're talking about punk music in the 70s and early 80s, and yeah, when we listen to swing music, you do think about those images of maybe a B-17 or soldiers fighting, or maybe a recycling drive. That it reminds us of a time, and I'm not going to say better or worse, but a time when everyone pulled together for a common goal, and it was all for the betterment of all of us. When I think about punk rock, I think about like maybe pictures of poverty or pictures of Reagan, or things that were splitting people apart. So and I'm a huge fan of punk rock, and that's probably the reason that I started playing drums, because it told me you don't need to have a classical degree to play an instrument, you just need to have something to say. So that's why I picked up the drums, is because punk said, yes, you can, anyone can play music. You don't have to be a bloated rock band or something like that. You can get out there and just have something to say. But what we had to say in the 70s and 80s wasn't unifying at all. It was angst.
Anti-establishment.
Yeah, anti-establishment, which was completely opposite of what was happening in World War II, which was we are all pulling together and we're all going to help the establishment.
Yeah, and when the establishment was worth fighting for, because it's not that. I mean, he's like you, Kurt. I'm a massive, great punk fan, and I'm hoping to get to London next year to see the original lineup of the Damned perform in London with Rat Scabies and Brian Jones. I hope that happens, but it gives me a different feeling, punk, than swing does. Punk kind of makes me a bit not angry, but it kind of makes me want to change the world a bit, and reminds me of kind of social injustice. As does ska, things like the Specials, things like that kind of remind me of unfairness in the world.
But bebop did that too, if I can interject.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
Bebop was a reaction against swing, not against swing, but against the racial injustice and things like that in a way, and also against the swing, almost the safeness. As much as I love swing, the bebop musicians came out of the swing bands, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, people like that, and they looked at people like Cab Calloway as sort of old, oh man, and then you couldn't entertain, and then it went the other way. So almost like bebop was a reactionary music, as punk was. Obviously musically a million times, more proficient. But I think there were similarities. I really do, social similarities between that. Anti-establishment. Yeah.
And as we say, swing music is pro-establishment, but pro-establishment for a good cause that we were united behind. And that's, as I started the idea of this show, the top of the show, that's what I think that swing music did. And the government recognized that. That's the whole point, is our governments had meetings in World War II about how important swing music was. We set up these psychological departments to send it out to Germany to undermine the respect that was still going for Hitler. We sent it out there to unify. We reacted against the Tokyo Rose and the Hanoi Han and all that. Well, that was the Vietnam, but those kind of Axis Sally things that were brought. We use swing music as a weapon of war. That's the thing. I didn't want to title the show "Weapon of War" because I don't like thinking of a swing as a weapon, because that has sort of a negative connotation. But it's part of the power of music to unite our forces to overcome that evil. And I think that's, you're both right there. The imagery is all tied up together. The P-51s, the popping a Coke bottle, the factory workers, Rosie the Riveter. I mean, in the factories in World War II, from my research, they found out that production went up when they were putting fast numbers on compared to when they put the slow numbers on. It makes complete sense. If you're churning out Bren gun parts in Coventry and they're playing a fast moving swing number, you're going to kind of work that machine fast. And if they're playing a very slow kind of maudlin ballad, so they realized that swing music was powerful in many, many ways, which is why they played it in the factories in California when they made the B-17s. Again, production went up when they played swing music compared to other types of music. And yet the people who were making the aircraft didn't feel like they'd been working any harder. They enjoyed it more. That's the weird thing, is that they didn't know they were being kind of, in a sense, used by the factory owners or the managers to work harder. They loved it. They loved working along. And also, don't forget the noise. They had to play the loud songs because they wouldn't have heard. A Bing Crosby slow number wouldn't have played over the sound of the music. But if you had a massive, great 40-piece band with a massive, great horn section, you could still hear that over the sound of the machines. So swing music was absolutely used in the war effort. So extraordinary stuff. Kurt, with Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, is there a difference when you're doing a set and you're planning your set? Because you've got lots of material you wrote yourselves, and then you've got some of the covers you do there. Do you kind of insert the covers sparingly? Do you still play wartime songs when you're gigging, or do you just stick with your own material these days?
No, we play a lot of covers. We have a record of a Cab Calloway tribute album. We have a Louis album, which is Louis Armstrong, Louis Prima, and Louis Jordan. So we do a lot of covers. I think the set lists generally are based on the venue. So if we're playing a festival and there's a lot of room for people to dance, we'll play a lot of up material. If it's a dinner theater, then we might play some of the maybe more complex songs that we have that you can sit through. So I guess it just depends on where we are. But Scott makes a set list for unique to each venue we play at. So there's not really a set list. We'll go out and play a week of do that set. It just depends on where we are. and how it'll go over. If there's a dance floor, the set definitely is dance oriented. But if it's a sitting dinner theater type of thing, or a performing arts center where people aren't allowed to get up and dance, then we'll change it to more of a performance oriented set.
And Ray, you've played jazz festivals around the world. You've played in Italy, you've played in Canada, you've played in America. Again, the same question to you. Inserting kind of a wartime song or one of those real old traditional ones, does that make a difference to your set? Do you notice a reaction when you come on with one of those kind of songs?
Well, I'll just begin by saying that we do exactly the same as what Kurt said that Big Bad Voodoo Daddy does. I've never worked a set list. In fact, my band laugh. They say if I've ever had to make one, if I've been asked to make one, I've stuck, my record is sticking to 2 songs because I change it. I'll do the same 2 songs to start. So I'll do When You're Smiling to start usually. And then and I do put the wartime songs, the one that really gets everyone going is Flying Home. The Lionel Hampton thing. And I play the Illinois Jacquet solo, then I'll do my own solo. And I'll also do I'll Be Seeing You. We do that one. A few of them,
Do you have vibes in your band, or do you cover the vibes with your band?
I used to have vibes with the Chevalier Brothers, but now I've got a 4-piece, me on tenor, and then saxophone, trumpet, trombone, and rhythm section. So no, cool. I'd love vibes, but I can't afford it anymore.
Yeah,
I would love it, but we'd be flying home without the vibes, But yeah, and we do Airmail Special as well, which is a wartime song. The Airmail Special, we do that one as well. We do a few of those things, And yeah, you just throw them in, and they're kind of secret weapons. But I don't do a set per se. I like to read the room as well, just see what's, because we just like you guys, we work to a different audience every night. You're doing a festival, and you play what I call the pot boilers. You play the 5 or 6 songs like Angelina at the Pizzeria or Buonasera or one of the Louis Jordan ones. Everybody knows. If I do a theater, I'll play more of my stuff. I just try to read the room like that,
Gotcha.
But to ask you a musical question again, because we talked about the fact that some of those bands in the war were huge. I mean, and as we said, it's not like Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw playing with a consistent lineup, because people are being drafted, they're they're going in and out of the bands, people are being picked up for other bands, enlistments are over, they go back home, so you're probably not playing with the same musicians kind of 2 days in a row. And this is without the benefit of modern recording studios with all your buttons and things. How do you think people like Glenn Miller and those guys balanced all the sound? How challenging would it have been to play with different guys every time and then produce records where the government are kind of wanting you to, you've got a day to record it, and they're going to put out that V record like the next day to create the sounds they're doing? That they must have been geniuses as arrangers. I mean, let's talk about Glenn Miller himself, Kurt. I mean, I think there's too much focus on Glenn in some ways, alongside all these other guys that Count Basie and Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman. But to bring together what I was saying there, these 40 musicians, different musicians every time, he must have been musically absolutely genius level.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those arrangements that he created were based on knowing that he would have that certain sound. Like he probably, I know that he wrote arrangements for trumpet because he knew that his trumpet player played a certain way, and so he thought this song would be perfect for him. So yeah, if you have a revolving door of musicians, it could be different and harder, but then again, musicians can come in and just read down the charts, and that's just the way it was then. But I do think that they had a, yeah, go ahead.
The level was very high.
Yeah,
I mean, and interesting about Glenn Miller as well is that he ran his band in the war as an army officer. I mean, he ran it as Captain Miller. I mean, he he insisted on the salutes. He insisted on the ranks being used. He said, I used a lot of the musicians he'd used before the war, and other ones from other bands. But he ran it as a military organization. He was a captain. They were his, if you like, soldiers, and he ran it that way. And Eisenhower recognized that. In fact, Eisenhower said that he and Glenn Miller had this comparison because they both managed these armies. Eisenhower managing the entire SHAEF, the entire U.S. Army and military forces in Europe, basically. But Glenn Miller running a band. But they made the comparison. They both marshaled their forces in exactly the same way. Glenn Miller he wasn't strict, but it was, I'm in charge. I'm the officer. This is how it's being played. This is how we're doing it. It's my arrangement. It's my rules. Which kind of goes against, in some ways, kind of the freedom of swing. But so he's creating this freedom in a very structured way, which I think is paradoxically very interesting. But you know, we're bringing it back to music again. Favorite? Either of you two have any particular favorite songs from that era that maybe ones you don't play yourselves in your own bands, but ones that mean something to you, that kind of make you think of the war? Ray, is there any particular?
Yeah, I like, and I'm not talking about Vera Lynn, but I like the White Cliffs of Dover. But I like when Louis Prima does it. You know, he rocks it up, and he did it in the 40s. The bluebirds over the white, and he'll swing it. You know, and that really to me that makes me a little bit teary in a way. That's quite an emotional song with what's going on. You know.
And Kurt.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if I have anything that really like that I think about from the war. I definitely think that the first record I ever picked up from my dad's collection that was actually my grandpa's was Benny Goodman live. And so when I heard Sing 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 and I heard what the drums were doing, I found that really drew me in and made me think like, wait, how's that? Who is this? Who's Gene Krupa? You know, that kind of thing. But I don't think I have anything that, you know, I listen to just pure for nostalgia's sake.
I think I'm right in saying Sing 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 was specifically listed by Hitler and Goebbels as one of the most dangerous, you know, jungle songs that was destroying the Aryan way of life. I'm fairly certain he actually mentioned that one as being, you know, anti everything they were standing for, which is an amazing song. Sing 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 is one of those ones whichever version it is, there's numerous different versions. I can't help but just my feet starts going. So, well, I think I'm going to bring it to an end.
I think that they actually, the Nazis actually had a rule about playing anything over a certain beat per minute.
Yeah.
And, you know, who knows if it was based on that, but yeah, you could go over a certain tempo because then people would start to dance. And that goes back to your feeling that the government was using this kind of music as propaganda. Like, look how free we are here. You know, this is the sound of freedom, and you don't have it.
Well, that's exactly what happened in these psychological warfare shows. That's exactly what happened. Interviewers were saying in German to Glenn Miller, and Glenn Miller could speak German. You know, your songs are absolutely representing freedom. Tell us about how great it is being part of the Allied forces with the Americans, the British, and how it is to work together in that way. So therefore, you know, they were going for that particular. It looks like we have actually got someone coming in now. So I think we finally got Ian there, just as we're winding things down. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
We've been live for the last 55 minutes. So we're nearly finished now, I'm afraid. But
give me 1 second. Hello. Apologies.
Yeah, no worries.
We've had all sorts of things, crazy things going on this end. We've had to all self-isolate, so we are basically all stuck in a house at the moment.
Oh dear. Oh well.
Crazy. So a few things.
No worries. What we'll do is then we'll bring you back, you and Ian, and maybe do something separately with you, another show some other time if you're happy to come back on and talk about stuff, because
well, I'm good now. I can stay for the duration.
Well, we've kind of gone full circle now a bit.
I see.
But yeah, sure. Let's. So you're in the Jive Aces. You are one of the performers, aren't you?
Correct. I play the trombone.
So we've been around the whole thing about and Ray and Kurt. Are you all right to stay for the 10 minutes or so, quarter of an hour?
Yeah, definitely.
Hi guys.
So so folks, we have Alex in from the Jive Aces, so that's cool. And as you heard, there a bit of a self-isolation, COVID-related issue there, and it's a sign of the time, isn't it? But we'll turn a spotlight on you, Alex. So I mean, obviously you haven't heard what we're talking about, but we've been talking about the power of swing music and the power of it to come together. What's your kind of knowledge about the influence of the music in terms of World War II, and what's your knowledge about the period?
I wouldn't consider myself a historian as such, but I've always loved the music. I was introduced to it I met the guys when I was kind of just out of high school, and they introduced me to a lot of the sort of everything from early Dixieland jazz through the World War II period up through 1950s rhythm and blues and the jump blues kind of era. And everything about it just struck me as very positive. So the dance, the feeling of it is all extremely positive, and it brought people together, broke down racial barriers, And you know, it just brought people up, especially at a time during the war when, you know, that's a pretty depressing thing to be going through. So something that kept everyone's attention on something a bit more positive and a bit more fun was definitely helped to get people through that period, I think.
Well, that's exactly what we've been talking about, really, and the fact that it was, you know, it was a used by the government as a message of propaganda and togetherness. And so when you're playing, you know, because the Giant Vases, you play all sorts of festivals and different size gigs, things like that. Where have you had and the band members had any encounters with people who'd served in the war, maybe wartime musicians? Any stories you can kind of share of that type of thing?
I'm not sure about musicians, but every year up until last year, we played at the RAF Museum in northwest London, and
Wow.
in Hendon, and it was like a sort of Veterans Day. So all the you know, the veterans that were left used to come every year. Unfortunately, that diminished each year, but it was lovely to meet those people, because the funny thing was that they went through, you know, the worst of it, but they were the most positive people, and then the most selfless and the most you know, they didn't want anything for themselves. They were always like, no, someone else needs it more than me, don't worry about it, you know. And you know, in their 80s and 90s, when we were, you know, hanging out with them, they were still just really chipper, and that's a real testament to spirit, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And did any of them tell you about listening to bands in the war? Have you ever heard people say, you know, I went to a dance in '43, or I went to you know, any experiences like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people tell us all the time that they saw Benny Goodman, or even later people like Louis Prima and stuff in Vegas, but specifically wartime stuff. I can't think of any specifically off the top of my head, but there's definitely been times where people have told us, you know, they saw different artists, and that's why they like, you know, coming to the event that we were playing at, because it kind of reminded them of those happy times, and it brought back those positive memories for them and stuff.
Well, that's a good point, and we kind of discussed it earlier, but that there's a weird thing that the world has a nostalgia for that period.
Yeah.
But actually, it was a horrible, devastating time. I mean, 50 million people died in World War II. I mean, we must never forget that. And yet somehow swing music was able to elevate itself out of that tragedy and be something that we could actually take out of that era as a positive thing. That's a curious thing to come out of it, because, you know, I mean, I suppose we have the same symbolism with like the Spitfire. The Spitfire says something to us, even though it was an aircraft that was designed to shoot down enemy aircraft. We kind of look at it as this beautiful thing that represented the great thing about being British, or in Kurt's case, the P-51 Mustang has exactly the same symbolism of Allied might. But yet we're able to look back at the war, at that tragic era, and yet swing music is something that we got out of it as a benefit. You know, that as we discussed earlier, the bringing together of races, the bringing together of styles, the bringing together of all these people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about the V records earlier that were sent around the world. We talk about the importance of the music being received by people in the jungles of Guadalcanal or in Bomber Command in Northeast England. So it's extraordinary things. So I mean, I'll come back to Alex in a minute, but Kurt, that is a kind of paradoxical thing, isn't it? That we look back at the war and we're able to see the joy in the swing music and somehow disconnect that from the tragedy. It's extraordinary. That again is testament to the power of the music, isn't it?
Yeah, I really think it is, and I think it was all in the service of bringing people together and giving people a break and bringing some happiness. You know, obviously there was amazing music in the era of Vietnam, but that was more protest songs, where these weren't protest songs. These were songs about helping people work in a factory to produce war effort material, things like that. So yeah, I agree 100%. And it is able to look at, to cut through all that and just go straight to the gratitude of us all working together for a common goal.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the Vietnam now. I know it's a separate rabbit hole I don't want to necessarily go down, but the only kind of pro-Vietnam War song I can think of is the Ballad of the Green Berets by that Staff Sergeant.
That's right. Yeah.
Barry Sadler, I think, wasn't it? That's everything else was anti-war, wasn't it? It was Grateful Dead, it was the Doors, it was. And when you hear this in the opposite way to swing music, when a movie maker now wants to set that tone of anti-establishment, anti-war, they've only got to pick one of those 5 or 6 tracks.
Yeah, Creedence, Clearwater,
whatever it would be, and we get that opposite symbolism to how they use In the Mood, isn't it? That's extraordinary. That those wars that were, and it was. Weirdly, it was the Vietnam vets were the sons of the World War II vets.
Right.
And so their fathers went to war and the music was there behind them, and that the sons went to war and the music was against the government in just 30 years. That's fascinating. A side rabbit hole we go down there. But Ray, I mean, again, you know, your father was a serviceman. The power of swing music to be a positive. I mean, we said earlier in the show, you've just got to hear one of those classic songs and you feel better, don't you? And yet it was representing an era of tragedy. That's an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
It is. Well, life is comedy and tragedy, isn't it? Even these times now, you've still got to find your happy kind of pocket, you know, and I believe that's what your happy place. And I believe that's what swing music was. For people that were suffering terrible things, like even people in the Blitz here. My grandmother went through the Blitz. My mother still remembers it. And I remember horror stories, you know, of sitting in a cinema when the lights would go out and in the end, they didn't even go down the air raid shelters anymore because they said, well, we just want to enjoy ourselves, had enough. And they'd sit there and chance their arm. And that's what my grandmother said. My mother says that now. But what swing music did, it did give that optimism. We need optimism in society, and we feel now that the music still gives. And Alex and Kurt will both testify. The music still gives optimism, and the tragedy in this damn pandemic is we're not getting a chance to play it. At least in the war, they had the chance to kind of play it, and they didn't have this virus. Now we can only do it online. But I believe the music should be heard live. You should feel that band. You know, the audience have to feel it. So. Yeah, it's an optimistic music, as you said. It's not a protest music. It's a happy music, and I believe happy music should come back again. It's faded in the last 30 years. You know, even the novelty songs or whatever that made people laugh. People don't smile with music anymore. It's all angst-ridden, and I believe that the thing with swing, it still stands today. That's why I play it, because it's a positive music for people. As Alex said, you know.
I wonder whether this year or last year with COVID, I haven't gone back and tracked the modern charts because I haven't bought a record made in the last 10 years, apart from revival stuff like, you know, I think the last album I bought was Hillbilly Moon Explosion, so they're making rockabilly stuff. But the modern charts, I wonder whether the last year there have been more happy songs in the charts than there would have been perhaps the previous year. I don't know whether psychologically people do need something a bit more uplifting during these times. I mean, I know that me and my partner Mag, we have had more evenings listening to swing music and upbeat rock and roll music in the last month. I certainly haven't been playing much Grateful Dead and Jesus and the Mary Chain these last few months. I have to say, I have found myself being drawn to kind of the upbeat stuff. So Alex, you know, you joined us later. So again, talking about the jive aces, when you're playing to a big venue, if it's, you know, even if it's rainy, if there's some bad news going in the world, how quickly does a swing music set lift the mood of everybody there?
Pretty much instantly. I mean, it's, you know, as an artist, it's my job, or it's our job as a band, to uplift the audience. I'm not there, you know, obviously I get a certain amount of, or a lot of personal satisfaction out of doing it, and it's very enjoyable. But my job is to uplift the audience. So if I'm not putting 100% into doing that, I'm not doing my job properly. So that's what you always go for. You go for hitting them and doing that straight away. And, you know, it usually works out pretty well. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, and that must be that connection. Again, we talked about earlier about the fact these guys in the war are they're performing music for people who might theoretically get killed the next day, so they're putting that extra effort in. So you must be, as musicians, when you're hearing the Glenn Miller recordings from 1943, 1944, the Count Basie recordings, the Cab Calloway recordings, you must be hearing that extra level of professionalism, that they're putting in because of the pressure, because they know those discs are going out to guys in airfields in the Far East or Burma or wherever it may be. So they're not going to kind of go in and do a half job. They're going to do a full job and also they're earning. It's interesting as well. Another bit of historical, I'm being the history nerd here, but it is my show. It's the American Federation of Musicians had that ban in the war on jukeboxes because the artists weren't earning royalties from jukeboxes, and President Roosevelt ended up getting involved in that argument. But the V discs, which were produced for the military, weren't subject to that same regulation, which is why. And again, thanks to Ashley for telling me this, and Ashley is watching this, they were supposed to be destroyed, those discs, after the war, because they weren't actually licensed in the same way. They were army records. So Cab Calloway, whoever it would be, would go in and record for the military. And the V disc went out to the troops. But the troops, they weren't owned by the soldiers. They were owned by the government. And I guess the government owned the record players, which when I'm saying it makes it sound really negative. But the point I'm making is this was a positive. This was to give these guys something. And so actually the black musicians paradoxically earned more in the war because of the V-discs than they would have done because of the union and the jukebox rules. So that's a bizarre thing that came out of it. But Alex, again, so then I'll come back to the other guys and we'll kind of wind the show up because I think we're kind of going in circles a little bit. But Alex, when you're putting a set together, I'll say the same thing to the other guys there. There's certain wartime numbers because you play the 50s stuff, you play your own compositions, you play the 40s stuff. What are the kind of the wartime songs that no matter what is going to happen, are going to be the ones that they're going to love that one? There must be a couple of standards that you're going to just knock them out the park.
I mean, the obvious ones in the mood. We do a small band sort of jump-in version of In the Mood. And people always like that because it always fills the floor for the dancers, which is great to see. We do a couple of Andrew Sister songs, Beat Me Daddy 8 to the Bar, things like that. And then some of the sort of lesser known, I don't know, like Freddie Slack kind of things and sort of Louis Jordan stuff. We do a lot of Louis Jordan songs. I guess that's more kind of the late, I guess he started in the mid 40s, but he came out of the big bands himself before he went solo. But that kind of stuff, those are always very popular because they're so well known and they're iconic and they're so memorable as well. They're songs that you can instantly start to sing along with, instantly start to hum, even once you heard them once. Choo Choo Boogie, things like that. Ain't Nobody Here But Us Chickens.
Well, that's the thing, those songs have that ability when you hear them the first time, is that you don't feel like you're hearing it for the first time. They have a sense of familiarity. And that was, again, was all part of the war effort. We talked about Glenn Miller kind of borrowing the Sousa marches from the earlier war and mixing it with the swing stuff. They're giving these guys a sense of escapism, but it's also a sense of slightly safe escapism. They're not trying to kind of shock them with something kind of avant-garde and weird. I mean, musically, Ray and Kurt, they're not kind of using weird kind of chord structures and stuff in the wartime swing stuff. It was all keep it simple, keep the beat going, have it a memorable tune. As you say, all of you, the GIs and the Tommies could whistle immediately. They could walk out of that dance hall and they've already got half the numbers they've heard in their heads because they were just instantly kind of catchy and connectable. So when you guys are composing your modern songs, do you kind of think about that wartime accessibility? I mean, I know, Ray, you love your bebop, you love your modern jazz, but as we said, there's sometimes going to be a kind of a Marmite aspect with that kind of music. Some people love it, some people don't love it, but the wartime swing stuff has that instant hook, doesn't it? So, what kind of tricks? This will be my last question. What were the musical tricks those leaders used to kind of bring you in? Are there any little things they did?
Simplicity and melody, but nice chords. I just think melody, really good melody, and then you put a good beat behind it. And I use that principle. If I write today, I don't want to write anything complicated. I'll use I'll think of a chord sequence and try to make it accessible and make the song. I'll write modern lyrics. I've just written one called "Locked Down but Not Out." But I'll always write them on what I call an old chord sequence, locked down but not out. Yeah. But I'll always write it on an old structure. When I say an old structure, I mean a traditional and the melody. So I think you can keep the music contemporary by doing it that way. but I can't write about the moon in June and romantic lyrics that they were doing back in the 40s, because it's all been done, and it's been done much better than I can ever do it.
Right.
I think the trick was simplicity, but musicality in the 40s.
Yeah. I mean, Cy Cranston has that song on one of his last albums. He's another, vintage about Twitter. I mean, it's a swing song, but it's about Twitter. And when you're listening to it, you're not really understanding that it's a lyrically it's about the 21st century, but the music could be from 1953. It's completely.
Well, that's what I think is a good. I think that's a good way of getting our music over, to try to write contemporary lyrics that people can understand, which is what Louis Jordan was doing, or Louis Prima were doing in a way, and trying to put it on a swing-based thing. And I think in that way, we're onto a bit of a winning formula in a way,
I mean, we could go off on and talk about. I mean, Louis Prima, I think, is one of my absolute heroes of all time. I mean, what he was doing lyrically and what he was doing with the, I've just got a couple of best of CDs alone, and even then, the changes he went over a few years, just going from every kind of style and
clever guy, very very bright man doing that. Yeah, clever. Never stayed still, Louis. Never stayed still.
Yeah. So, well, I think we'll bring things to an end at this because we're just going to end up talking about the wonder of this music. But any kind of closing remarks ever you want to make about has this show made you think a little bit more about the power of the music you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Really, just how important it is, and how important it is for now times as well, for our times now, to try to keep it going out there, no matter which way we can, whether it's online or live or trying to sell our records. I think we've got to keep the music playing.
Also, I think that even though the music is associated with an era, like the big band style, the Glenn Miller sort of iconic sound is considered iconic of the World War II era, and the kind of more rhythm and bluesy, rock and rolly sound of the 50s, it has a completely timeless quality. You can take any of those tracks and play it, and it doesn't sound dated. None of it sounds dated. Whereas other styles of music sound much more stuck in the era that they're from. Whereas swing and rhythm and blues and stuff is completely timeless to me. And
we said that earlier. I mean, I'm a big punk fan, but punk fan kind of is rooted to that late 70s, anti-Thatcher, anti-establishment, anger. As Ray Davis in the 60s with the Kinks was kind of anti-stuff, but the swing music just kind of transcends all that and has this ability to just.
Every Christmas, what are all the songs that suddenly come out? Dean Martin, Nat King Cole, Bing Crosby, all Frank Sinatra, all the classic swing artists. They're all suddenly de rigueur for the month, as if they've never gone anywhere. But then the rest of the year, everyone forgets about them. But
that's a good point.
That's because those tracks are completely timeless and they'll last forever.
Yeah. Yep, Kurt. Any final words from you about have we sort of got you thinking about things tonight?
Yeah. Oh, actually, quite a bit. I'm just thinking right now, without being too political or any political, should I say, is that we have a new administration, and it seems like the overarching theme of the administration is unity. And I don't know what the format would be, but I know that there's been a lot of musicians left behind in this pandemic. And I think that doing something like V Records again and getting some music out there to kind of make people a little bit happier would be a great thing. It would put musicians to work. Think about it as a artistic infrastructure projects. I know that FDR had some programs like that where he would fund people to write plays, or I don't know if it involved music or not. That might be more in your studies, but I think it would be a great idea to do something like that now, especially in America where we really are polarized. And if I can think of anything, if anything's going to help bring us back together, it might be music. And I think it would be great if there was some kind of program that was sponsored by this new administration. It would get musicians back to work as soon as possible, and maybe give people something besides, a stimulus check.
And also I think to add in on that is also the fact that we could do another whole subject about this, but the whole streaming phenomenon. It was Gary Newman said recently he had 9 million plays of his songs, but he earned like 30 quid for it or something.
Right.
I consciously try and buy CDs from the artist. I try and consciously buy from the websites of the person, even if it costs me a few more quid to have the thing sent to me or to download it, because I don't like going through Amazon. I don't like going through these big things there. And this is a time, I'm going to be a bit preachy now, and I, you know, to my audience, is that the world was we benefited from the music in World War II to help push us forward, and now I think it's time for us to help musicians as well, and think about where we get our music from, and
But
think
not for
about
nothing.
supporting the acts that are doing stuff live and doing stuff like Ray does his online things with his, you know, solo stuff to his fans. And I know the Driver, you have been incredible. You've been night after night after night. You've been doing your stuff on YouTube, which has just been incredible. I haven't watched as many of them as I like to because I'm doing my own stuff. But that is extraordinary. You're going out there still bringing people music. And I encourage people in my small way, I'm just a tiny YouTuber, but to encourage live music, to buy music directly from artists. Don't buy the, you know, the compilation CDs from Amazon. Buy from the artists direct, support them, encourage what they're doing, support their online things, support their online work, and share music around like we used to. This is the thing that Zoom can do. I remember, I'm going a bit preachy, when I was in my teens, I'd go to a little record shop in Colchester, Essex, where I grew up, and the guy who ran the shop would recommend other music to me. That he'd say, hang on, you're looking at Creedence Clearwater Revival. Have you tried this? Have you tried Ronnie Hawkins? Have you tried the band? And he'd say, oh, you're liking Madness. Have you tried this? And we don't get that anymore. Everything is by what is the bestseller. You go onto Amazon, it's, you're like this, but you should buy this because it's sold 1 million copies last week. Well, I don't necessarily want the music that sold 1 million copies. I want music that will move me. So I think it's time that we gave a bit back to music now, and musicians and guys like yourselves who are still going out there making music through these conditions. My hat's off to you, because we all need a bit of a lift these days. So anyway, thank you very much, guys. It was a weird one because, Alex, you missed the fact that for the first part of the show, I was completely green. My screen went green, so that was really weird. You weren't here. We carried on anyway. It was kind of the wartime adversity coming together. We got through tonight. So I've got links below to the Jive Aces website. I think I've got them there. So they're doing these live things every night on YouTube. I've got links to Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. I've got links to Ray on Twitter and all these guys' social media. Follow what these guys are doing because they're passionate about their music. I mean, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, you don't need any help with publicity. You're huge, as the other two are as well. But anything for those who are watching this who are from the history side of it, who aren't familiar with these bands, go and check out their music. In terms of what we've got coming up on World War II TV, tomorrow night we're talking about the Wasp pilots with Catherine Landek. Then we've got shows about the Canadian Army over through the weekend. Lots of stuff coming up. Check us out on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe. As I say, don't forget to check out the Jive Aces on YouTube and what Ray's doing and what the BBVD are doing. And thanks, guys, for joining us. It's been fun. It's been emotional. I've enjoyed it.
Nice to meet everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So thanks for watching. I'll see you all again in World War II TV very shortly. Thank you very much for watching.